The inquiry into the infected blood scandal, which has been called the worst disaster in the history of the NHS, has begun. It opened with testimony from some of the thousands of victims who were infected with HIV and hepatitis. People who contracted serious illnesses from contaminated blood have given harrowing testimony on the first day of the public inquiry into what's been called the worst treatment scandal in NHS history. Thousands of patients were infected with hepatitis C and HIV through imported blood products in the 1970s and 80s. Some were just children, and many have since died. One victim recalled being given a year to live after being diagnosed with HIV. Another said she didn't find out she had hepatitis C until 30 years after a transfusion. The chairman has promised that his inquiry will be frightened of no one as it tries to establish the truth. Our health correspondent Sophie Hutchinson reports from the hearing in central London.
This was an historic day for those infected by the contaminated blood and for their loved ones. Some had waited more than 30 years for this chance to put their suffering on record. Sir Brian Langstaff, who's leading the inquiry, described the evidence he'd read as incredibly moving and sometimes chillingly factual, and he paid tribute to the witnesses.
For many, making a statement has been, and for some it yet will be, an act of bravery. And I'd like to acknowledge that publicly here and now. It may have stirred up, and it may yet stir up, distressing memories.
First to give evidence was Derek Martindale, who had severe haemophilia. Sitting next to his son for moral support, he spoke, sometimes with his voice breaking, of the trauma he'd suffered. Like so many thousands, he'd been treated with infected blood products. He described the moment when, aged 23, his doctor gave him the life-changing news.
I was told that I was HIV positive. I was told I had about a year to live. I was told not to tell anybody, including my family and my parents.
That was because of the stigma of HIV in the 1980s. It's estimated that 5,000 people with bleeding disorders and as many as 30,000 others who needed blood transfusions were infected with HIV and hepatitis in the 1970s and 80s. The blood they were treated with had been bought from abroad, some from American prisoners, many of whom had the infections. Carol Ann Hill was the second witness to speak. She explained how she was infected with hepatitis C after a blood transfusion, but was not told until 30 years later.
The fact that the thousands of people out there who, like me, didn't have the least idea that they got hepatitis C, and there may be a whole wave of more work coming from that, and I hope it's going to be handled a darn sight better than it has been up to now.
Victims and their relatives are hoping to find out why warnings about the safety of the blood products may have been ignored and why many documents and patient records appear to have been lost or destroyed. Between now and October, the inquiry will spend 11 weeks travelling around England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, gathering accounts from those who have suffered in this treatment disaster.